If you're searching for purchasing software or a new procurement tool or even a better purchase order system, you're probably starting to notice that most software tools look the same. And here's the problem, is that your business is searching for one type of tool when the operation itself needs another type of tool. And you end up getting a program and then you start to lose money and you're not sure what's going on. And it turns out the program that you have doesn't really cover all the aspects that your business needs, especially if it's growing. And that's what I want to talk about today. Hi, my name's Jill, and this is the PO Framework. I've spent the last 22 years processing and managing purchase orders and dealing with every kind of problem that comes with them, especially if they're wrong. And I can tell you the companies that use software tools, the ones that might notice that their, the vendor invoice doesn't match up, or maybe they have a pricing discrepancy, it's because they haven't learned how to fix the tools inside the system, and then they realize that maybe the system they have isn't enough. And so in this video today, I want to go over the different types of systems and how to know which one is best for your business. So let's get started. So let's look at my example. Here I have Craig's Landscaping. Now, Craig is a service-based business, which we'll get to in a minute. But most businesses are composed of two sides, right? They have a buying side and a selling side. And on the buying side is where procurement lives. And basically, procurement is you decide what you need, how much you need of it. You have to vet your suppliers and vendors. You make sure that they produce a quality product for a good price. And you request a quote and then you negotiate that price. Now, in this example, let's say Craig wants to he got an opportunity to redo part of a bird sanctuary. So he has to get, a whole bunch of sod and soil, rocks, a pump maybe, several things that he doesn't have in stock. So he has to go to a vendor. And in this example, he would have to decide how much sod he needs and which person he's going to buy it from, and then get a price from them. And if it's good, he'll issue a purchase order. Now, that first part, the procurement, is what people would refer to as the strategy or a strategic element. And then when you issue the purchase order, actually buying something from your vendor, that's usually referred to as the transaction phase. So we'll list that here, okay? And he issues a purchase order. He then receives the goods. And if everything matches up, then he can pay the invoice. Now, after he gets all these things, he's going to have to provide what I referenced earlier as a service. And on the selling side of the equation, that's what you refer to as revenue, because that's when you're going to actually make money for what you're in business for. Now, let's keep in mind that Craig's Landscaping is a service-based business, which means it's not like he's, buying parts to put together a wheelbarrow and then selling you that wheelbarrow. He's actually selling a service. And in this example, he's going to be renovating part of a bird sanctuary. So he's going to have to deal with labor costs because he's going to have a crew. He's going to have to buy several different items, to complete the job. And he's going to have to deal with transportation costs, among other things. And so he's going to be looking for a software tool that has, first of all, that can keep an excellent vendor record. So we'll say here, the vendor record. And he's also going to need a tool that can itemize on his estimate everything that it's going to cost him. Because even though he might put certain charges under a different category, he's going to have to be able to keep track for himself exactly what this job will cost him. So he's going to have to write up a very good bid. And then he's going to be able to need to take the items on that bid and transfer it to a purchase order. And he wants to make sure that those items can be maintained and then eventually turned into a bill or an invoice. And you want to be able to, with whatever tool that you have, you want to be able to keep all the information the same as you go. And that would be critical for someone like Craig, and also to be able to run reports to see how much money he's spending on a job, or how much money he's spending on certain types of materials, and how much money he's spending with certain vendors. So let's talk about the purchasing aspect. Now, in many software tools, you're going to notice that the screen for the estimate is similar to the screen for the purchase order because they have many of the same fields that you have to fill out. And so for this example, we'll assume that Craig is about to create his bid. Now, something to keep in mind is that when you put in an item number for a vendor, they're only going to go by the item number when they get the PO. Okay, you can have the item number for, let's say, a certain type of plant, but your description could have soil. It's not the same, right? And as for vendors who use computers to process purchase orders, or even humans for that matter, they're going to go by the part number. They're not going to go by your description. So you have to make sure they match. So in a software tool, you need to make sure that there's a column for the model number here, and we'll just call it the number, and the description. You want to make sure that you have both those fields that you can fill them out. And very important is the unit of measure, which we call the UOM. Because you could have, for example, sod, I believe you could buy by the pallets, or you could buy by the square foot. You have to be able to allocate exactly how you're buying it so you know the cost. What if it's $1 per square foot and you need 500 square feet, but 500 square feet is the same as a pallet? Would you know that the vendor, sells it that way? It all depends on how the vendor sells that item. And without a unit of measure, you run the risk of making a mistake. And it might be just a few dollars, but, over time, especially if you don't catch it, then that's where you can start to leak money. So it's very important that whatever tool you have is able to have the item number here. So we'll say item number 123. A description, we'll say sod. And for unit of measure, we'll have square foot. And in this case, Craig wants a pallet, so he's going to put 500 square feet. But you also have to make sure that you have the unit price. Let's say it's $1 per square foot. So if it's $1 per square foot and you want 500 square feet, that would go to $500. So you'd have a column for the extended price. And I know this might sound a little trivial, but if you don't have these fields in place, especially if you have somebody who's, super busy, they don't have a lot of time, they need to go out and sell and make money, they don't have a lot of time to spend on the paperwork. But at the same time, you want to invest the proper amount of time to make sure that's right, because you don't want that mistake to carry over. So it's important that these fields are present in the bid or an estimate screen and in the purchase order screen. So you have a way of accounting for the items. You also want to have a way of accounting for, in this instance, installation, labor, items that it might not be a physical item. It might be, a non-physical item. Well, installation's physical, but transportation, for example, you need to be able to allocate for all those costs. So you'd have, let's say you have a part, and you might have, a physical thing like, let's say sod. You have a way to calculate your install. And you have a way of calculating travel. Because for someone like Craig, or really any service-based business, it's not just the driving back and forth from you to the job site. It's you driving to the vendor, you driving here and there, everywhere. And it's the time you're spending on driving to that customer that you're not spending on another customer. So you want to be able to keep track of every cost. And let's say that the bid is approved, and just a note, you want to get that physically signed off. A simple email approval isn't really enough, in my opinion. So let's say you get the signature, you approve it. It's time for you to create the purchase order. You're going to look at the same fields, the item description, the price, unit of measure, but you also need a software tool that allows you to assign a PO number. That is a must, an absolute must. 22 years, I'm telling you, you have to have a PO. Without a PO number, it's a mess. So you must have a PO number, and you must have a job name. You must be able to keep track of how much money. So let's say it's Amy's Bird Sanctuary. Every single document, whether it's the invoice, the packing slip, a bill, estimate PO, whatever, it all has to say Amy's Sanctuary, because then your software can better keep track of how much money you're spending on it. Not just the vendor supplies, but all your travel, all your labor, everything. It just makes it so much easier when you're trying to calculate, to see where your profits are. And most important, I can tell you, in 22 years, the number one reason that there was a mistake on a purchase order wasn't always price, it was the shipping. Either they put the wrong address, there was a typo on the zip code, They didn't have special instructions. All that kind of stuff was unaccounted for. So you want to make sure first that you have the FOB. And that's a whole nother video in itself. But basically that determines who's paying the freight. Either the vendor shipping it to you on their dime, or they're shipping it to you and you have to pay for it. And the next thing is special instructions. That also could be a whole video. So if you're having the vendor ship the items to your warehouse, most likely it's going to be on a pallet. You're going to need a lift gate, a way for the items to be taken off the truck and dropped down to the ground so you can kind of wheel it off with a pallet jack. Usually those rates, as of the time of this recording, 2026, are probably about $150 for a lift gate. Depends on the carrier. And you also want to make sure you have a call for appointment. You don't want the truck showing up and you're not there, because the truck's going to drive from the vendor to you. And if you're not there, it's going to have to go back and then come back again. And you don't want that, more money. And also you want to make sure you get some sort of freight estimate. Now, granted, fuel prices are in flux and, you never know what the freight is day to day, but at least you can get some idea. So you'd like your vendor to be able to say, yeah, for your items, it's going to be $500, rough, give or take. Now, normally you don't really know the exact freight till something ships, but you at least have an idea. So you're not, surprised when you get the freight bill. And then also your system has to have a way of being able to receive in the purchase order, because when a purchase order comes in, there's going to be usually a packing slip. It's in a clear sleeve, usually on the outside of a box, and it's going to itemize all the items that you got in this delivery. And there's not pricing or anything. It's just the items mostly. And you want to be able to take that list, match it to the PO, and then match it to the invoice. All three have to match. So you have your PO, your pack slip, and invoice. That is what you call three-way matching. That is, it's the gold standard for accounts payable to be able to complete three-way matching and have everything good to go so they can actually issue a check to the vendor, pay it, and close it out. And if you don't have a way of being able to match all three, that's a problem, especially if you have multiple shipments for a PO. That's another video as well. So you want to make sure you have a way of being able to create a very detailed and thorough estimate. It's the itemization that counts. Carry that over to a purchase order, and then also carry that over to an invoice and be able to match all of that, because that would be, it'll save so much time for your accounts payable. Or if you're a smaller business, maybe you just have an accountant or just yourself. It'll save you time, because again, the time you invest in the beginning to make sure everything's good save you a ton of time on the back end. And that's why getting the right tool is so important. So let's look at the sales side. In our example here, we've already gone over the buying side of Craig's business with the purchase orders and such. And now we're going to look at the sales side, because that is where your business faces the customer, right? And you want to have a tool that helps manage the outbound revenue. And, you want to make sure you stay profitable. And in some of those aspects, you're going to look for, they call it CRM, which is the customer, relationship management side. Basically, you're keeping track of all your leads and your customers. And then you also want to be able to issue quotes and turn them into orders. You want to make sure you can deliver on the promises to your customer. You also want to be able to create invoices and be able to keep track of things for accounts receivable. And very important here is the reporting. You want to be able to report not just your profits and sales, but you want to be able to keep track of which customer is selling to, how often, is it a recurring sale, things like that, and be able to keep track by salesperson. So assume Craig's Landscaping was a little bit larger business. He would probably want to keep track of all, the activity of all the salespeople to see where they are revenue-wise. And very essential is the customer file. Just like on the buying side, you wanted to make sure your vendor file was thorough, you want to do the same with the customer file. You need to make sure that your tool can account for all their information, not just billing information, but their payment history, the types of payments they accept, things like that. And that will help you be even more efficient when you go to consider which accounting tool or sales tool, software tool that you need for your business. Now let's talk about the hybrid model. Before we talked about the buying side, one platform, and hopefully only one subscription. So here we have my diagram. And we've already talked about the buying side, which is procurement. We talked about the selling side, sales. And now we're going to focus on a model that does both. So the key is to know what the depth is. So here's my diagram, and in the center, I have the hybrid model. And you might wonder what type of business would even use this model. And you could think of maybe a distributor, an equipment dealer, or even a manufacturer, someone who made maybe a commercial dishwasher. They'd have to buy the parts, they'd have to buy sheet metal, wires, all that kind of stuff. And then they would have to make the dishwasher and then turn around and sell it. So they would have to definitely keep track of both sides very carefully. And basically a hybrid model takes the procurement, we'll put procurement here plus purchasing, and they kind of merge those together. And then on top, they put a sales layer. That's basically what the hybrid model does. But you have to be careful. You want to make sure that your hybrid model can go deep on either side. Now, if you're going to leak money, it's going to be here on the purchasing side, because you have spending controls here, price controls, approvals, you're issuing purchase orders, you're receiving goods, you're matching invoices. That's mostly where the money will leak. On the other side, it's important as well, because you have to keep track of your customers and your revenue and such. But you really want to make sure that the purchasing side is extremely deep and covers everything. And of course, the sales and the reporting. And, you can make up your mind on what software would work for you. Some companies might want to stick to having two platforms. And just, that way they can have the focus on either side. And then some might choose a hybrid model. So it's up to you. There are dozens and dozens of software platforms that businesses can choose from to help manage their business. So you have to wonder, at what point do you decide to go from one platform to another? So let's discuss. Here we have my makeshift diagram, and I will have PDFs at the end for all of these. Now, here we have the employee counts and what would trigger, you going to a new platform. So here we have the micro business, which a lot of, very small businesses would start out with just using a QuickBooks, which can handle both sides, both the buying and the selling. And usually you just have one person be your bookkeeper. But when your business is growing and one person can't do both, then it's time to move to a little more complex platform. So you would have the next category, small business, 10 to 49 employees. And typically you might use a procurement only software program like a Tradergram or Spendwise or something. And I'm not an affiliate for anybody. I'm just giving you an example. And in this instance, you would make sure that whatever you're going to buy, you just have basic approvals for. And you can even integrate QuickBooks if you have to, to help you kind of do the transition. Now, when you get to the point that the owner can't approve every single purchase, then you need to move up. Now, you may or may not have more employees. I just put an example here. Lower to mid-market would be 50 to 199. But it's just, when it gets to the point where the owner can't approve everything, that's when you need to get something a little more sophisticated. And your approvals are more multi-level. And this is key. You can't do manual three-way match. Like, it becomes too much. And a three-way match, as a reminder, is when you have the purchase order matched with the invoice and the packing slip. And as a reminder, the three-way match is a purchase order, and you match it with the pack slip, and you match it with the invoice. And all three of those have to match. And if they don't, you have a problem. And if you can't do that manually, then yes, you would definitely need to have a little bit better software. Now, if you're still growing and you have maybe 2 or 3 departments that are buying independently and the reports aren't really giving you what you need, you might need to go to something even more sophisticated. Now, I have here mid-market businesses, 200 to 999 employees. That's just an estimate. But in that instance, you're having, maybe you have multiple locations or multiple entities. You have 2 or 3 offices maybe in your state, and you just require something that's more focused on, especially on the procurement side, because again, that's where you most likely leak money. You want to have very sophisticated approvals, spending limits, and just, measures in place so you can keep track of the money going out. And of course, if you get to the perhaps $2 million mark or more, you would go to something even more sophisticated. But just for this video, I wanted to go over the basic dividing lines, not just for the number of employees that you have, but for the functions that you need to perform to decide which platform is best. To review these software platforms appropriately, I've developed 2 distinct scorecards. One is going to be for the general software itself, and the second scorecard is just going to focus on the purchase order module. So let's see what I have. So here you can see I have one for the software program here, and I have one for the purchase order here. Now, for software itself, we want to look at the supplier and vendor management, very important. Core data integrity, the ability to fill in the appropriate fields and to make sure those fields are available. Workflow controls, so you're not duplicating efforts. Three-way matching, which is essential to protecting your profits, essential. Invoicing and financial controls. I'm not offering any sort of financial advice, but I do suggest and recommend that whatever software platform you choose can monitor both of these very effectively. And then also the document output quality, which means when you're creating a purchase order, for example, and you send it off to a vendor, you want to make sure that it comes out at their end in a very readable format and there's nothing missing. It's very clean and professional looking. Same with your estimates to your customers as well. Now, looking at the purchase order module, and just to say, for both of these scorecards, mine are very detailed and thorough. This is just a quick little overview. I have actually many more categories I would evaluate. But for a purchase order, for example, you'd want to make sure that you could fill in for the PO number. You have to have a PO number. Without a PO number, it's like your PO just gets lost in limbo. And you want to also make sure that you don't have a duplication. And, because sometimes the programs and the systems used by a vendor don't always catch that. And you don't want to be invoiced for something twice. Also, item number description, very important. You want to be able to describe exactly what you want. Now, when a vendor gets a PO, they're going to go by the item number and they're not going to go by your description. So a lot of times the description is for your benefit and for the customer when you do the estimates. The next one is unit of measure. This is so essential. When you're buying something, you need to know if it's by the each, by the case, by the pallet, and you have to make sure that you can do a unit pricing for whatever that each or case is, and then an extended price. This will help, I don't want to say eliminate, but it'll help you catch any pricing errors, especially when you get the grand total and you're like, that's way too much money. You can go back and see maybe that you messed up in the unit of measure itself. And in 22 years, I can tell you that is probably one of the top mistakes I saw. This one here, FOB, that's freight on board or free on board. Basically, it tells the vendor who's responsible for the freight. Essential to have that on there. Shipping information, I can tell you, outside of pricing, shipping information was probably the top reason purchase orders had mistakes. People would have a typo in the zip code, or they would forget to put a lift gate or a call for appointment. All of this is essential. And also, you want to make sure that, because a lot of the purchase order platforms will have a box for the shipping info, right? So the shipping info is here. Then they have a box at the bottom of the PO for special instructions. And so you're putting information for shipping in 2 different spots. That could be missed either by the vendor or by whatever system they're using. They might not know to look in both areas. So you want to make sure you can put everything in one spot. And you want to make sure too that you are able to have in the footer of the PO a field to put a deposit, taxes, especially freight. You at least want to have freight in there because, fuel prices are in flux and you need to make sure that you at least have an estimate. You kind of know what the freight's going to be so you're not surprised. So where do you go from here? You can check out my QuickBooks review on this channel, and I also will be reviewing a new platform next week, incorporating the checklists and scorecards that I talked about today. And you have to think, what kind of business are you? It's not just how many employees you have, but what are the functions of the people in your business? Because you don't want to buy a platform that has, too many bells and whistles. It's too much money. You want to be able to buy something that fits where you're at and can enable you to grow. And that's the most important thing. And that's what I hope to do on this channel. It's not just to talk about the platforms, but also talk about the mechanics within the platform, specifically the purchase order mechanics. Because if you can get a few of those core things right, it could help eliminate so many mistakes and save you a lot of money. So look below in the links for the checklist and the scorecards. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe and comment. Let me know if you have any questions or any issues you'd like me to discuss. And we'll see you in the next one.